Hey everyone, welcome back to the In the Zone podcast. With me today is a fellow Yugi tuber, YuGiOh from Zero, also known as Ben. Hey.
Hey, welcome, or not welcome, but thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be in the zone, and I'm excited to talk about retro Yu-Gi-Oh with you and dive into some meaty questions.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. Big fan of the channel. I've been watching since I believe you were covering Yugi Kaiba format. Real quick, do you want to tell the audience what your channel is kind of all about?
Yeah, so basically what I do is I just go from the very start of the Yu-Gi-Oh TCG, in LOB format, all the way to the present day, although we haven't quite made it there yet. But we're at the end of the DM era now, about to transition into GX. And basically I just go over each format as it arises. But I also try and focus on like gameplay. So I have a lot of gameplay videos showing off different decks in the formats. And we also hold tournaments. We have a Discord server where we hold monthly tournaments and weekly locals. So it's like a lot of just fun playing retro Yu-Gi-Oh with people and showing people that these formats may be better than they might seem.
Okay, and with that said, I have 10 Titanic questions for you. I have cultivated on a Google Doc sheet. So hopefully these shouldn't be too terrible to get through, but I guess we'll find out one way or another. So question is, are you ready?
I am ready. Damn, that was an easy first one.
Okay, that was the pre-question. So the first question we got here is, what inspired you to start the channel or the series?
Yeah, honestly, I owe a big inspiration to like Simo's progression series and history of Yu-Gi-Oh series and stuff, because that's what got me playing retro Yu-Gi-Oh again with my friends. Because basically what I would do is I saw those videos and I was like, damn, that's fun. I haven't played Yu-Gi-Oh in a while. I want to dive back in to the old formats that I used to love as a kid. And so I got some friends of mine together to play like a progression series. And then eventually that fell apart because, people got busy and stuff. And then it's actually really funny because the day of the History of Yu-Gi-Oh's first episode aired, I actually contacted a friend of mine beforehand and said, you know what, we did progression that sort of fell off for people. I'm kind of curious to see what happens if we just, do it from a constructed environment. We just had access to all the cards. We built decks like that. And it was just very funny timing because then like an hour after I sent that message to them, I saw the History of Yu-Gi-Oh thing in my YouTube feed. And I was like, damn, Simo, beat me again. But yeah, no, it's just like, that's what got me into it. And then seeing everyone else's, retro Yu-Gi-Oh content as well, just sort of inspired me to make a channel. From there, the rest is history.
Yeah, I really enjoy your kind of content because there's a lot of people making all these different progression series, but you're just really getting to like the meat of things of like what the format was really like actually like, at least looking in hindsight, which I think really gives a unique spin to it.
I do think that like Simo series are great for getting people into retro Yu-Gi-Oh videos as a whole too. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to cast any shade on Simo or MBT or anyone on those series because I think they're doing great work too. But I think like a rising tide raises all ships. So it's like, it's cool that we're all contributing to this big sort of retro Yu-Gi-Oh exploration, I think.
Well, absolutely. Like I always say, the more the merrier.
Exactly.
So question number 2 is actually a subscriber question. I asked some of my subscribers on my community tab on my channel some questions to ask, and one of them was, is there a stopping point or will you keep doing this in perpetuity?
Yeah, I feel like this is a question I've run into quite often because I always fear that I'm going to fall into the stereotype of like a Yugi boomer, where I'm like, oh, I only like the DM era of the game or GOAT or whatever, and whenever the cards with the white borders or the black borders came out, that's when the game died, right? But I honestly think that every era of the game has something interesting to offer for a certain type of player, and like I'm excited to just keep going for as long as I can. Like I have no plans of stopping. I'm devoted to just plowing ahead until Yu-Gi-Oh itself ends. And I'm just excited to explore all the different stops along the way. And if you're watching my channel or this channel or what have you, and you sort of don't like the later eras of the game, I encourage you to give it a try when I get there. Or if you see another video and you're just like, oh, that looks kind of interesting, just try it out and see if you actually enjoy it or not. Because I think one of the great things about looking at this from a retro perspective is that you have other ways to play the game, right? If you don't like the synchro era stuff, you can just go back to playing GOAT. But what do you have to lose to trying it out? And that's sort of my philosophy whenever I explore a new format and why I'm just going to keep going forward.
So we just say that this series is the thing that keeps pushing you to like keep making them, because for my history series, there's been points where I'm working on an episode and like, oh my god, this is gonna go on for years and years. It's never gonna end, is it?
Yeah, and I make like a lot of videos per format, or maybe not like a ton, but like a fair number of them. And it is a lot of work, like getting all those out there for every given format, and also knowing when to like stop covering a given format in my initial coverage of it, because there are always going to be like certain jank decks that people might want you to cover, right? Like I could cover Destiny board in Chaos format, for instance, if people wanted that. But realistically, like I've got to look at all the decks out there and be like, well, I can't reasonably devote all the time to every one of these decks. So I've got to like pick and choose a little bit. And that's sometimes hard, but I am pretty happy with my general coverage of the formats that I've done so far.
Yeah, it may just be me, but does it feel like some of the decks you're covering are a little more selective than compared to like some of your early content where you kind of like I'll just do as much as I can, and at some point did you realize like this isn't gonna work in the long run?
Yeah, it was really during Critter format that I realized that, because I think Yugi Kaiba and Critter, I sort of just tried to go as wide as possible. And those formats, if you don't know, those are basically the first official formats of the game. Yugi Kaiba just uses cards from LOB along with Starter Decks Yugi and Kaiba. Critter adds Metal Raiders. So there's a very limited card pool there. And so you can really dive into every facet of the card pool, right? There's not archetypes from like a year ago that, you need to pay lip service to, But then going beyond that into later formats, it's like you accumulate a lot of older strategies that you could cover again, right? Like Mass Control is a big deck in Critter format, but you move on to Treasure, you move on past that, and it's not really that good. So should I cover Mass Control again in those later formats? And basically the idea I came to was like, no, I don't have time to do that. People are not really interested in that. And I feel like it's a disservice to feature a deck like that. And I don't really think that it's actually a deck in that format. So it was a tough thing to come to, but I think it is better that I came to that, or else I'd still be on like Treasure format now,
Oh, absolutely. You definitely need like a level of consistency and a level of making the content easy enough to produce where your brain doesn't fry every month, I think is also really important, just for even content creation in general.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm not sure if I could right now. I make like probably like 3 to 5 videos a week. And one of the reasons why I can do that is because it's just very simple. Basically, I get games and I look at their replays on Dueling Book. And I just basically do it all through Dueling Book, right? I just stream capture and I just, give my analysis of a given game that I've played. So I don't have to do like any heavy editing on it. I don't have to add, graphics or visuals or anything like that. It's just very, very simple. Like I would not be able to do the sort of videos that you make regularly, just like every day, right? It's also something that people do enjoy, that sort of content. It's something like I was very inspired by like E3 YuGiOh for that style of content where they would basically just go through Edison format, show off games, and they make a ton of videos as well. And I just sort of followed in that mold.
So do you record like throughout a week, or you just find one day and you just say, hey, people, let's do on this day, let's get everything done, and then you just chop it up?
It depends. There are definitely weeks where it's just easier for me to do it all at once, but oftentimes I just try and just find times when I'm free. I often record like a little bit after I play the games, so I'll just ask people, at night generally, anyone want to play? And then, I'll get those games, and then the following day I'll try and find times where I can actually, record a video on it. And I used to be like a lot more careful about, editing stuff out. Like I'd edit out like my ums and ahs and things. And I think that is worth doing. I'm not trying to say that people shouldn't edit that stuff out, but I realized like, I'm making like an hour-long gameplay analysis video on this and going through and editing out every and ah was just sort of counterproductive. So now, it's an interesting sort of thing where I had to learn how to keep the imperfections in and just be like, well, I can't feasibly edit this down to the smooth sort of quality that I normally would. But
yeah, and now you're just getting a bunch of comments on YouTube being like, you said this 20 times.
Honestly, if you want to make those comments, point it out. YouTube has a way to edit the videos too. So if you put in a timestamp, I can just go in and edit that out. So probably be doing me a bit of a service.
Yeah, editing is it's a lot of work, even with the simple stuff. I think a lot of people who don't edit videos don't necessarily know how much effort goes into that. So I know some of these questions have like sub questions, but let's move on to question number 3 here, which was, what has surprised you the most on this journey?
Honestly, what surprised me the most is the community that we've built up. And it's not an unpleasant surprise. It's a very, very pleasant surprise, actually. Not that I expected people to be like, angry and, mean all the time and stuff like that. But I'm just surprised that like we've been able to build such a big community and such a good community, I think, of people who are, passionate about these games, passionate about these formats, and willing to try things out. And it's just been really rewarding to see us continue to grow. The tournaments get bigger and bigger every month, and it's just been really nice to see that. So I just want to thank everyone out there who's a part of these communities, and hopefully we'll just continue to grow more.
Yeah, it absolutely has been growing, because we talked about this before we were recording, but I go on Format Library and I see one of the highlighted formats is it's always usually the format that you're covering, which I think with as big as Format Library is for like I don't know if I want to say like retro scene, but just the whole online Yu-Gi-Oh community like as a whole with your channel, I think has been like really cool. And even on top of that, I mean, when I was asking months ago on what guests people wanted for this podcast, I mean, you came up a few times.
Yeah, and I'm honored that people would suggest me for it. And I also want to give a big shout out to the people over at Format Library, like Jazz and everyone who works on that Discord and site, because I do think it's a really, really good retro resource. And working with them has been great for both building the YuGiOh from Zero community that is playing these tournaments, and just getting more people interested in these formats. Because like a lot of people just sort of treat the DM era of Yu-Gi-Oh as like discount Magic the Gathering, and they're just like, well, I don't really want to play that. It's just very boring and it's just worse GOAT, right? But I think that people, when they see the highlighted format and Format Library being, like Android or Yada or what have you, when we're holding a tournament, they're like, oh, maybe there's something here because people seem to enjoy it. So I'll give it a shot as well. And not everyone who tries them likes the formats, but there are a fair amount of people who do and are, pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, like I recall when I first stumbled upon Yugi Kaiba, it was very minimal decks, very basic stuff. But now with more people playing and more Yugi tubers that cover historical topics, and we just get so much more innovation and deck variety, and now just the resources that are out there for these old topics is way bigger than it was at even 5 years ago.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that if I can inspire someone like I was inspired to make videos as well, like that would be really, really nice. My dream one day would be to see a bunch of channels more like, E3 Yu-Gi-Oh! Or TCG Rewind, where they're focusing on these formats themselves and diving super deep into them. Because I think that is how a lot of these formats really grow. And I've always said, I can't really be the one to do that because I'm devoted to sort of continuing forward through Yu-Gi-Oh's history. So I can't really spend time focusing entirely on one format. Maybe in the future, but
unless it's Wicked Worm Beast and Yugi Kaiba, right?
Oh yeah, well I gotta rep Wicked Worm Beast, right? And that's another, we were talking about how I made a ton of videos in Yugi Kaiba. Wicked Worm Beast got a fair bit of spotlight because that is one of my favorite cards from that format. Very, very silly, but it's just cool to see a card that when I was a kid, at least, I looked at it and I was like, this card's terrible. It returns to your hand at the end of the turn. Why would anyone ever play that? It's cool to see that card actually see some play and have good applications. That's another rewarding thing about doing this journey is seeing cards that, were looked down upon or not really well known, like people dusting them off and realizing that they're actually a lot better than people thought.
Yeah, I mean, without that, we might not have gotten Exodia in Critter or Labyrinth Tank Turbo. So you're saying eventually that we're gonna have someone's gonna make a channel. It's gonna be YuGiOh from 100. I think that's the next logical step in all this.
Yeah,
They're gonna
eventually.
start in modern and work their way backwards. So the idea's out there if anyone wants to take that.
That would actually be pretty cool. Like, honestly, it's almost like that would be cool as a progression series too. The retrogression series where you open a pack of the latest pack and then you just work your way back.
The regression series sounds so sad.
Yeah. Well, it would just be like, well, I got all these new cards from the previous set, but all the later cards are so much better. So I'm just gonna stick playing with the deck that I've been playing with. But I'm sure someone could make it work.
I mean, that would be kind of interesting, like taking one modern deck that has been around for a long time and just see how far you can go back before the language changes to a incomprehensible language.
Yeah. And I think of all the decks that could do it, Sky Striker is definitely a big one that could actually make it pretty far back because that deck is just, it's so flexible in terms of like how you control the games. And, you know, you get powerful earlier spells and you just fit that into the deck. And it's like, it's another spell for me, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So
Upstart
that'd be
Goblin
interesting
going
to
from
see.
1 to 3 to 1 to 3 and
Oh.
that'd be absolutely wild. So this leads me to a fourth question. Speaking of formats, I mean, I know this will probably be a fairly format heavy discussion here. What has been your favorite or surprisingly favorite format thus far?
I think honestly, it's Yada format. And Yada for my favorite, for surprisingly favorite, probably Fiber format. These two formats are like very close in time to each other, so I just like that era of the game, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But Yada format honestly feels to me a lot like an earlier version of GOAT. And by that I mean like not necessarily that it feels like GOAT format, but it feels like how people playing GOAT format were playing in like a couple years ago, where people are looking back at this format, trying to discover new strategies, realizing certain cards are better than they expected. And, you know, there's a lot of innovation going on in Yada right now. So I've always said, like, if there's anyone out there who feels like the GOAT meta has gotten stale, which I'm not trying to say the GOAT meta has gotten stale. I'm just saying that there are people out there who think that. If you do believe that, then try out Yada format, because I think it will solve a lot of the issues that you have with modern GOAT. It's also very, very balanced for having so many power cards running around. You expect it to be just a sack fest, but games are actually pretty skillful, pretty grindy. And it's sort of like the syndrome thing from The Incredibles, where it's like if everyone has access to the power cards, then they're not really as powerful as you'd expect. And it's just a really, really good format. The past couple of tournaments have been won by the same player piloting a different deck each time. And I think that that's a very good sign that like skill matters a lot in it. And also there's a very, very diverse metagame that can evolve from this. So I'm really excited to see where Yada format goes. And then Fiber format is pretty surprising for me because it's also a very good format. Very different from Yada. It's a bit more aggressive, and you sort of have to, when playing it, you have to have a good mastery of like tempo and when to get aggressive, when to not. It's so surprising because like it's the first format with Fiber Jar introduced, and Fiber Jar is a major part of the format. And Fiber Jar has this reputation as being a degenerate card, like one of the worst cards in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. But I think actually in that format is pretty healthy. And that's somewhat surprising. And, you know, I think that there's going to be more Fiber formats coming in the future or tournaments, that is, because someone was passionate about Fiber and they were like, I'm going to make a Discord server for it and I'm going to host tournaments in it. And I think that's really cool. And this is sort of what I was saying earlier, where like that sort of inspiration, like I'm honored if I can be a part of that and sort of allow these formats to grow further.
Yeah, in regards to Yada, I've always found that format to be super fun. I mean, it's one of the most important formats because it was the first one that had a world championship built around. So just seeing all these like classic cards that are legal that you wouldn't necessarily see in GOAT, while still having a fairly balanced meta with a lot of interesting interactions, I think is really fun. And even with Fiber format, you know, that's right before, right? It's like pre-Pharaonic Guardian that has its own kind of uniqueness to it. It's like, well, what do these cards change in the meta? Well, they actually change a lot.
Yeah. And it's surprising how much they change, but I think the changes are pretty good. And unfortunately, after that, you get into Breaker or Scientist or whatever you want to call it, and you get Magical Scientist FTK running around. So the fun kind of ends after that point. But even that format, there's stuff to enjoy there. It's just not quite as peak Yu-Gi-Oh as like Yada and Fiber are for me.
Yeah, comparing Scientist FTK to Yada lock is very different types of win conditions.
Yeah, and the Yada lock is not as degenerate in Yada format as it may seem from later on in the game's history. It's a lot tougher to pull off, and a lot of people have even cut Yada from their deck because they're just like, this card's too inconsistent, and I just want to play a better card instead.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a card that you need to be in the right situation because otherwise it just kind of sits there. I think that's kind of a problem, which leads me to question number 5 here. Have there been any formats that you've disliked?
I try not let my dislike for them bleed into my video coverage of them because I want to sort of present these for people out there who might enjoy them, that just enjoy a different style of play than I do. For instance, I really don't like Joey Pegasus format. Joey Pegasus format is the format basically Graceful Charity, Harpy, Feather Duster, Sinister Serpent. Those have all been recently legalized, and Graceful Charity is at 2 copies. So you can wind up in these situations where someone goes first, they activate double Graceful Charity, set a bunch of back row. Turns out they've drew IO off the Charity, Imperial Order that is, and then they've just shut down their opponent from playing. So I don't really like that sort of dynamic, and the format feels like very, very sacky to me. But I also acknowledge that, you can do things like playing Hayabusa OTK, and that deck is a lot better in Joey Pegasus because you just draw so deep into your deck if you go first, and you can set up that OTK a lot more easily. I think that there are people who enjoy the more sort of sacky style of play. So, if for those out there who might enjoy Joey Pegasus, I don't want to sort of cover it as if and this format's terrible, but here's a deck in it and stuff like that. So I generally try and just keep an even hand with it. But I won't shy away from the fact that I don't like it, if I'm talking outside of that. But for the videos themselves, I try and just be like, here's the deck. Here's how you can play it if you want to.
Has that mindset ever prevented you from covering certain decks? I know there are some decks that are just, you wouldn't play Mass Control in Yada format. That's just like a random example. But has there been any times where I'm definitely not covering this?
Yeah, I think the closest thing to that would probably be, honestly, not even just degenerate decks in general, because I'm okay playing degenerate decks. I'll play Stallmill and Yugi Kaiba. I'll play Burn in a variety of formats and stuff. But honestly, for me, that level comes with a certain level of jankness, right? So Vampire format, I was originally planning on covering Guardians, but I tried to tinker with the deck, and I just could not get a deck built that I actually liked. And the deck is already just really bad. It's basically Guardians. If you don't know, they require an equip spell to bring out a certain monster. So you have to basically equip it to your opponent's monster. But then you need the right equip spell with the right monster in hand. And it's a mess. So, I was planning on just covering it in regular coverage, but then I was like, this deck's just too janky even for me. I can't do it. And generally that is where I have to draw the line. It's I didn't cover Gate Guardian in my regular Critter format coverage because the deck just couldn't pull off its win condition. And I could potentially show it off and show, playing against a meta deck, but the games would just resort to me bricking on not Exodia pieces, but Gate Guardian pieces, and then just being sad as my opponent just killed me. And, we actually did a video where it was Gate Guardian versus Great Moth, and that was great because that is, relatively even power level.
And people were complaining that I did not make the decks true to what the deck. I tried to make them playable, given the pieces I could while still keeping them. And I did summon 2 of the 3 Gate Guardian pieces, which I think was a lot.
Yeah, I think you did a great job. I mean, you look at those decks and you've sort of got to balance playability with being true to the deck itself. And at a certain point, some decks you just cannot be true to the deck. You just got to be if you want the deck to do nothing, sure, I can have it do nothing, and then the games will be terrible. But if you want me to actually make this deck somewhat workable, then you got to be flexible on that. And I think you did a good job of building those decks. Yeah, it's Guardians. I just could not figure out a good way to do that. I think it'll be fun. We could maybe have a mirror match in the future between Guardians, because I think a Guardian mirror match would actually be interesting, because then you both got equip spells that you're equipping to things, and so that would be cool. But the deck just in general would not really be that good on its own.
It's such a weird strategy that you gotta have the monsters, but you need equip cards, so you need a monster to use equip card. It's. I think it says something that you didn't want to cover that when you covered Exodia Necros.
Yeah. Exodia Necros actually was better than expected too. It
Yeah,
was
you
like,
summoned
damn,
Necros.
yeah, and like I was not expecting to get that far. So yeah, no, it definitely is like, and the Necros video shows like I'm willing to cover jank. Like I'll cover it. Not every deck I cover needs to be
Hmm.
a tier one meta threat, but like it needs to be somewhat workable. You know, I need to have something to do with it. But
Absolutely.
um,
Have you ever considered? I know for a little bit you were doing like throwback videos where you actually went back to formats and covered that. Is that something that you might like bring back like once in a while, or are you really trying more to just keep pushing forward?
So, it's an interesting balance to strike with that. And I think, like, back when I was doing those throwback videos, that was a good thing to do. And it got people more invested in those older formats again. And I'll never rule out the possibility of doing that again, like, especially if a new deck sort of arises and it's like, damn, that deck is cool. And it's very different from what I covered before. So I'll go back and try it. But I think where I've sort of been filling that on the modern version of the channel is I hold like weekly local tournaments in the Discord server and I like stream those. And those locals are generally in formats from the past that, I sort of covered a long time ago, but now we can return to and sort of play games with it and show off a lot of games in that format. And I feel like it's sort of like a nice compromise because it sort of gets people who maybe weren't around when I covered it originally. It allows them to like actually play it for themselves and experiment with it a bit. It allows people who are missing games from those formats to see more games in those formats. And it also just, allows us to watch some fun games and just chat as a community too. That's sort of what's filling the role of those throwback videos. But again, if people want me to do more and if new decks arise that are worth covering, I can definitely do them again.
Yeah, I think one of the most fun ones that you've done for one of your locals was the LOB locals, which
Mm.
for me, LB has just always been a fascinating format because it's the very first pre-list, if you can even call it a format in Yu-Gi-Oh. And I think just seeing everyone try all these crazy strategies was just like so fun. And I think really shows just the love for a lot of these older formats. And it's only gonna like as you continue your series, it's only gonna add on to later formats come later DM or GX, 5D, Zexal, so on.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to see how it continues to evolve from here. And it's like it'll also be nice to have the locals because like if I'm all the way in like 5Ds, right? And people want that DM action, right? Because DM and 5Ds do feel very different. It's good to provide people with an outlet to play those DM era formats too. And so I'm excited to just keep doing the locals in the future. I think we haven't missed a locals week like since I started it. I don't think I've skipped a local. There was one locals that I didn't stream because I was having technical difficulties, but we've still held it, and so we've actually held it every week since then.
Was
And
that
I'm just continuing to plan and do that. So
was that the Mecha locals that I streamed?
yes, it was. Yes,
Yeah,
I believe it was that one. Yeah.
that was a
Um,
fun. That's another format I think is a real hoot.
yeah, and it's so cool because like you've got these weird fusion sub decks that no one actually knew at the time because first of all they were just made with tournament pack cards, which are going to be really expensive, and secondly like the new format happened like a little bit later, so they didn't really have a chance to play with that. And
Yeah, TP1's in a weird period where it is like it's clearly after the I believe it was the July 2002 list. I think TP1 was like August and then September was Magic Ruler. So it's like a really weird like
yeah,
middle ground, but it changes a lot just adding Mechanical Chaser and the fusion subs really
yeah,
just changes the
completely
meta.
completely different. And also like it's kind of interesting too, like the decks that I showed off in that format were Mechanical Chaser, just basically typical, beat down deck, thing like that. The Fusion sub deck. And also because Mechanical Chaser is now the dominant beater, you've also got Umi beatdown making resurgence because Umi debuffs Mechanical Chaser.
Hmm.
And then you can play like 7-colored fish instead. And it's just sort of like neat dynamics that you wouldn't expect and that never arose at the time because of course they didn't. There wasn't enough time to play that format. Not everyone had triple Mechanical Chaser because it was a super expensive card. So it's just cool to sort of revisit these formats from this perspective and see like push the limits of like what we can do with them.
So you can say you're going to cover Exarion goats?
I am going to make a video. I do have a plan to make a video where it's like, what would Xarion Universe be like in GOAT format? Does it break the format and stuff? Because I do feel like it's a question that like a lot of people have, and they still have it to this day. Like, of course, there's the blog, or not the blog post, but the forum post that just sort of details the entire thing, that is constantly like shown around. But having a physical record of it in like a duel, I think that would be pretty cool.
Oh, absolutely. So it leads me to question number 6 here. This is a subscriber question, so thank you whoever commented this. Are there any particular formats you're excited to cover down the road?
Oh, many. For me, my really nostalgic spot of Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, of course, I grew up with the anime and the card game and all that stuff, but like, I'm really nostalgic for 5Ds because that was when I started like, engaging with the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community as a whole. Like, I'm never a competitive player. I wouldn't go to tournaments and things because I couldn't really afford a deck, but I'd go to like sneak peek events and things like that. And I started doing that like when the Duelist Genesis came out. So I'm really nostalgic for a lot of the 5Ds era. But even beyond that, like, there's just some very, very good formats that have not really much representation in the YouTube sphere. Like, for instance, Perfect Circle. That is a super good format, but you don't really have like any 3 Yu-Gi-Oh! Or TCG Rewind for that.
That's one of my favorites.
Yeah, and it's just like every game I've played of it has been super good, and I'm really excited to dive into it. I'm also excited to reach like, Goat, Edison, Tengu Plant, all the ones that are like currently popular and stuff. I always get comments where it's like, oh, you should play Goat. Oh, you should play Edison and stuff. And it's like, don't worry, I'll get there eventually. I also think that for those formats, I'm probably going to approach my general videos a bit differently there. And that's also pretty exciting for there because like, for me diving into GOAT, like what can I say that other YouTubers have not said already, right? Mm-hmm. So I sort of have my own plans for how I'm going to approach those formats, and I hope that people enjoy them.
So there's definitely like a little bit of pressure coming to like some of the more popular formats, you would say?
Yeah. Because it's like these formats, right? If I get something wrong, it's like, well, you got something wrong, but you're the only one saying this stuff. So it's like, there's not a built-in community who's going to be like, well, actually, this YouTuber said this, or like this YouTuber said this or something. I'm sort of like the only one showing off these gameplay videos for these sorts of things. But when I get to like GOAT, it's like if I misplay like a chaos control list, right? People are going to be in the comments being like, well, actually, you should do this because I've been playing chaos control for 10 years and like I know the combo lines like the back of my hand and stuff. So there's a bit more pressure to like actually, get onto a good level and stuff. And I probably won't be able to reach that level in the short coverage that I do of GOAT. It's just like not feasible to match up with people who've been playing for years and years. But I am planning on, talking to other GOAT content creators and things like that. And hopefully we'll be able to cook up some fun content for y'all and some fun coverage of it that maybe not be, I might not spend too much time in GOAT, honestly, like, because again, there are so many other people making that sort of content. But I think I'll enjoy my stay while I'm there. So
yeah, and I'm sure regardless, you're inevitably going to get people that say, well, why didn't you cover this deck? Why didn't you cover that deck? When there are so many decks in these highly covered formats, it's like, where do you put that stopping line at?
It's a bit tricky too because that's just how many decks there are in the formats that are already really explored, right? But because there are so many decks in GOAT or Edison or something like that, the formats around those formats also have that sort of deck diversity there too, right? Like if you go to the format right before GOAT, there's going to be a relatively similar amount of decks, right? Mm-hmm. But can I cover all those decks in the previous format? Well, maybe not. And so I've got to make hard decisions there. For GOAT, I probably will just stick with the like main meta decks. I'm sure that a lot of people want me to cover things, like Elemental Hero or things like that. And I probably will cover heroes because it's iconic. Outside of the really iconic rogue decks, I probably won't cover too many of them because, there are other YouTubers like, Skilled Brown Magician and, many other people who've made these sort of more rogue decks viable in GOAT. So that content's out there for people if they want to see it.
Yeah, you're either an Anthony Alvarado or you're an Alethea. It's binary.
Yeah, exactly. The two ends of the spectrum, yeah.
Yeah, I really hope like more people try out formats outside of like the popular, I would say popular 3, not counting current, because there's like so many good ones. Critter, Yugi Kaiba, Yada, Perfect Circle. I think September 2012 format with all like the
Yeah.
little formats in that is just an. I would say it's even better than Tengu Plant format, but that's a bit of a hot take, I suppose.
I feel like just going through these formats, like people do wind up with opinions about like, oh well, this format's better than Goat or better than Edison. For me, like I definitely have my own personal rankings of the formats, but I also think that like it's good just to not compare them because I noticed like in my comments for the videos, I've gotten some comments where it's being like, oh, this format's so much worse than Goat and stuff. And it's like, well, even if it is worse than Goat, like you can still play it, you can still enjoy it. It's a different vibe than Goat. And I think that that's a good attitude to have because I feel like a lot of what is preventing some of these retro formats from growing is like there are people who are just so devoted to Goat or so devoted to Edison or so devoted to whatever format they really like. They're just like, I can't play anything else. And everything else is worse than this. And so I don't even know why you're wasting your time on that. And I'm just like, why don't we just, all play whatever we want to play and just, I can play Goat and Edison and all the formats that I'm covering here. Like,
It's a children's
so
card game.
you're not tied down.
So do you think that at the end of your DM era coverage, you're going to make like a whole big tier list of all the formats?
Oh yeah. I got plans for my end of DM era stuff. Like I'm also planning on going back and like making shorter guides for the DM era formats that I've covered already, just for like brief intros, or maybe just one bigger video where it's just like, so you want to try out a format from the DM era. Well, here are the formats that might appeal to you. Here are their strengths and weaknesses and things like that. And hopefully that'll be a good way to get more people into formats that maybe they want to try out, but they don't even know they want to try it out yet.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So this leads me to question number 7. First off, how are you doing? Doing all right? Hanging in there? These
Yeah.
questions not too tough?
Some have gotten me sweating. I try and keep cool under the pressure.
That's the idea. I spent a lot of time molding these together. So question number 7, which is sort of a counter to the previous question. Has there been any format that you're dreading to cover? Has there been some really degenerate, maybe like a Trooper format or Airblade or Stein Monarch, some really degenerate thing, or is there something that you're just like, I don't know if this might be fun, something along those lines?
So it's interesting because my answer is kind of counterintuitive. So when I first started getting into like online Yu-Gi-Oh and playing it like in Discord groups and things like that, my first introduction to that was really the Reaper Discord server that was started by MBT when the History of Yu-Gi-Oh series got to that point. And I played in Reaper for a fair bit, and I even managed to top a tournament. I think just one. It might have been 2, but I think it was just one. It was a really fun time. The Reaper community was really cool, but the format eventually just devolved into Stein combos. And it's a shame because a lot of people went into the format expecting like a more diverse version of Goat with a bunch of interesting road decks and things like this. But the format actually turned out to be what a lot of people would consider a lot worse than Goat. And, reaching that format and covering it on my channel, I'm not going to make it seem like, it's like a jank paradise where you can play a variety of different things. I'm going to report that it is a Stein Narc format, right? Like that's what it is basically. I'm dreading it a little bit because it's just like, damn, this format was so cool. I don't want to rain on anyone's parade who might still enjoy it. But hopefully when I reach it, I'll be able to sort of get people interested in it for its own merits, right? Because like, even if people went into it with a different idea of what it would be, I still think the format is somewhat fun in its current incarnation. I'm also someone who enjoys the Steinarch format, so like, I'm maybe not the best source on this. I'm a degenerate through and through when it comes to these sorts of things. But like, there is something to enjoy for people there who want to play that style of deck. Yeah, so hopefully I'll be able to do it justice, but that's probably the one that I'm looking forward to the least.
Okay. Yeah, Reaper's definitely an interesting time. It's like, what happened, the format after Goat is this whole kind of wild. And I think a lot of formats, which a lot of people kind of complain about Goat to this, but I think every format will eventually dilute and devolve into a couple formats. And the worst case is that, yeah, it might be a very degenerate deck. I think people that complain about Chaos Turbo probably don't know how good they have it.
Yeah. And, even then, like, there are decks like Earth Aggro and Goat that is doing somewhat well. And so there's still places to grow. And, like, even if a deck becomes the quote unquote best deck in the room, then you open up the room for counterplay, right? If you know everyone's playing Chaos Turbo, you can play, like, for instance, a lot of people are playing Warriors because Warriors is good into Chaos Turbo, right? And so it's sort of like, it's cool to me that when formats reach that stage where they're very, very solved, right? Or maybe not like even entirely solved, but they're somewhat solved, right? It's cool to see what people do to then innovate upon that and then react to that. And it's almost like a dialogue between tournaments. And it's just very, very cool to see.
Some formats is just even hard to counter some because some decks are just so oppressive. But that just, sometimes the side deck really comes into play. Some formats are defined by the side deck to what you can do, what you can stop certain decks, especially formats that have more of a triangular meta than a straight line, which I think is really fascinating.
And it's just like, you got to take these formats as they are. And I think that if you do that and you don't go into it with expectations about what they should be, then I think it becomes a lot more enjoyable. And also, if you aren't enjoying a given format, there are plenty of others out there. And that's part of why I'm doing this channel, is that, like, I want to give people more alternatives. I don't want people to get, like, burned out on a given format. There's always different options. This game is partially so great because it's had so many different stages of evolution. And I encourage people to try out different ones.
Have you ever been burnt out on a format after even just like a short amount of coverage? It's like where you thought to yourself, oh, I have to cover this, but I kind of want to move on.
The main one for that was kind of Android format, because Android, I sort of, Yugi, Kaiba, and Critter, I sort of went all in on and did a bunch because I knew those were popular. And approaching Android format, I also knew it was very popular. And so I went into it like with a very granular mindset where I was like, okay, I'm going to show off the meta deck and I'm going to show off all these different techs you can do in the meta deck that doesn't really change it much, like changes it a little bit and it may be worth talking about. And I very quickly sort of like, it just exhausted me of playing that style of deck and treating it like in different ways each time. And I think it got a lot of other people tired about it because, like, after a certain period of time, those videos didn't really do as well. And so it sort of taught me a lesson where it's like, no matter how popular a format is, it's good just to sort of cover a given meta deck, not get too into the weeds about the different techs you can do for it, and then just move on to the next deck that's different enough from it. And that's sort of been my philosophy ever since. So,
yeah, when I worked in news, I heard of the term cocktail talk, where you want an answer that's essentially short but sweet. Like, you want to give a thorough answer, but not have it where the other person gets annoyed that you keep talking.
I struggle from that, as this podcast probably hints to. It's something to balance as a content creator and as someone just trying to figure out what the best way to present these formats to people are. And I think I've struck a relatively good balance in recent formats, but it's always something I'm trying to negotiate and grow with.
Yeah, I would say that you've cultivated a more of a positive community, rather one that's devolved into a bunch of people hating on deck choices and errors in play and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, and eventually, different formats may develop that community around it. But, for now, we're just trying to be as open-minded, optimistic as we can. That doesn't mean, like, looking at a Gate Guardian deck and being like, this can be tier 1. But it's just more being like, oh, that's an interesting idea. I'll try this out. And then looking at what you can do with it. And just, having an open mind. And, like, kind of what we were talking about with Necros actually managing to win a game. That deck is better than I expected, right? Like, and I'm not saying it's superb, but it's a cool rogue strategy. And I normally would have put it in, like, trash tier. But I think it can be a rogue deck now. So that's the sort of approach I think is worth taking for these formats.
Oh, absolutely. So speaking of positivity here, question number 8. Have there been any regrets when looking back at coverage on older formats?
Oh, yeah, all the time. And mainly it's just because, like, I look back at the older videos and I'm like, I feel like sometimes I've made too many videos. Maybe I was making it in a worse format than I currently have, because I feel like now my videos are relatively streamlined, but way back when they were a bit looser, a bit less professional, I think. Not to say that my videos are the peak of professionalism now, but I kind of regret that, some people who wanted to start from the beginning will have to not slog necessarily, but like they'll have to go through periods where my videos are less well made and maybe a bit harder to watch. I think in terms of like what I've actually covered, I don't really regret it that much. The like content of it, it's just more the form of it that it took.
Okay, so it's not something you'd ever consider like at some point redoing just to redo some early episodes?
I have debated it, but I think that'll mainly be for like when I do my sort of wrap up of the DM era and sort of have guides for that. I think that will be sort of when I sort of do my big redoing for that. But it won't be like super in depth. I'm not going to go through all the different matchups again and show off gameplay for everything. But it will hopefully be a better jumping on point for people who maybe want to get into it but don't want to watch the earlier, more messy stuff.
Yeah, I recall like a year or so ago, I went back and watched some of your LOB videos. I think just like get a look at the deck lists and like, oh man, this is what happened before. It was like way different. I mean, which is a good thing because it goes to show that you're learning and you're improving. And I mean, I can say the same thing about my content, like my early stuff. I don't think I could go back and rewatch.
Yeah, and it's like that's what we have to do as just content creators and just people in general. You always want to try and improve and just keep getting better. And that's just my goal. Like I look back and I regret it slightly, the lower quality, but I'm also like, well, here I am now at this stage and I'm much happier about this. So it makes me feel better about where I am now and where I'm going to go in the future.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I can't wait to see the channel in a year, 3-5 years plus potentially. I mean, who's to say that your whole background and haircut and like everything completely changes in 5 years? I mean, it can be anything really. It's kind of
maybe I'll be able to tame this mess of hair. This curls everywhere. I just haven't been happy with like gel in the past, so I'm just like, I'll have it like this. It is what it is, But it's like I admire facial hair. I cannot grow it for the life of me. It just comes out like all bad, all patchy, like it's really bad. But yeah, you and JDZ talking about your mustaches in that episode I was like, damn, if only I could grow a mustache. But
you gotta get a fake one when you cover like dark counterparts in Phantom Darkness.
Yes, the evil Ben.
Yes. Neb. Kind of going back up in a more positive note than last one was kind of a joke of me saying it was a positive note. But this one's more of a positive note. So question number 9 is, what are your hopes for the future of the channel?
Honestly, my hopes are just to continue growing, get more people in the tournaments, get more people watching and innovating. That's just my current hope. Like eventually I think it would be cool because right now we hold one monthly tournament for the DM era format that we're on. I think it'd be cool if we're in a later era to have like multiple monthly tournaments because, we have one for DM, one for GX, etc. So that way everyone can get like the itch of what they want. But that takes a lot of work, takes a lot of organization, takes a lot of time. Right now, I'm not really at the point where I can do that, but maybe in the future we can reach that point and that would be cool to see. Yeah, I just want to give people a place to play these formats that they might not otherwise have. And if we can continue doing that, that is my goal.
Yeah, the more places to play and the more people covering stuff, I think people are more than happy to have that around in any capacity, whether it is in the written form or in the video form or a Discord server. So question 10, the final question. What does Yu-Gi-Oh mean to you?
Oh, that is a good question. I think honestly, Yu-Gi-Oh is the community, right? It's just like, because the community is such a big part of even defining the retro formats, right? Like there's been debates in the community about where the cutoff for a certain format should be, what cards should be included, etc. I mean, you've got that in GOAT with Xarian Universe. You get that in the earlier DM era where like things are much more nebulous and like there are no set formats like tournaments to define a format around, right? Both in figurative and almost a literal sense, like it's the community. It's just great to like continue being in the community, like providing a net good for the community, hopefully. Like hopefully people enjoy my stuff and enjoy the formats that we're covering and enjoy playing in the tournaments. But yeah, that's honestly what it means to me. And hopefully, hopefully people just take that attitude in general with the game as well, because I think a lot of people get wrapped up in just, I got to win the game. Just having fun is the key thing, and having fun with your friends and maybe new friends that you make over the course of playing these games. Like that's what it means to me.
All right. Yeah. Excellent answer. I couldn't say it better myself. So yeah, so that was the Titanic 10 of the In the Zone podcast. Hopefully you had a good time. Hopefully it was as good for you as it was for me. You have any like
Oh yeah.
shout outs you like to give?
Shoutouts would just be, to the Discord server, YuGiOh from Zero Discord server. You can check out any of my videos, and the link will be in the description there. And if you are interested in any of the formats that I've talked about here, that's the best place to go. And you can join the tournaments, and it's just a lot of fun. And that would be the big shout out. Shout out to you. Thank you for hosting me here. It was a blast to be on. And shout out to the community as well, just everyone in general who makes this community so great. Hopefully, more people join, and shout out to them as well.
Yes, and shout out to everyone watching this. So, thank you all for watching In the Zone. And if you have any suggestions for future people for this podcast, definitely let me know down below. And until I see you all next time, including you, Ben from YuGiOh from Zero, have a wonderful day.
Yeah. Peace.